£640. Not your insurance, not your MOT, not a service plan some dealer is trying to upsell you on. That is the tax bill now sitting on top of a huge number of electric cars on British roads, and 18 months ago it did not exist at all, not a penny of it. This is not a rumour, and it is not a forecast. It comes straight from the government's own vehicle excise duty tables, published in black and white, for the tax year we are in right now. And here is the part almost nobody driving an EV in this country has fully worked out yet. If your electric car cost more than £50,000 when it was new, this charge does not hit you once. It hits you every single year for 5 years in a row. If you own an electric car, or you are thinking about buying one this year, stay with me to the end, because there is an exact number attached to your exact car, and most owners do not find out what it is until the bill actually lands on the doormat. For 15 years, electric cars in this country paid nothing. £0. Not a reduced rate, not a discount, actual zero, every single year, for as long as you owned the car. That was not an accident. It was policy, built deliberately to nudge people out of petrol and diesel and into something with a plug, buy an EV, and road tax simply stopped being a line on your budget. That was the deal. That was the promise printed on every government leaflet and every dealership brochure for over a decade. And a huge number of people believed it, planned around it, and bought accordingly. Then, on the 1st of April 2025, that promise ended. Overnight, every electric vehicle in Britain became liable for vehicle excise duty for the very first time. New zero-emission cars registered from that date onwards paid £10 in their first year. £10 sounds almost like a joke, and it is designed to feel that way, because it is a decoy. From the second year of ownership onwards, that same car moves to the standard rate, which now sits at £200 a year for as long as you keep it. Read that again, because the number that gets printed in the headlines is never the number you actually pay. £200 every year, forever. That alone was enough to catch a huge number of owners off guard, because plenty of people bought their EV specifically because the running costs, including tax, were supposed to be close to nothing. But £200 is not even the real story here. The real story is what happens if the car you are driving cost more than £50,000 when it rolled out of the factory. Not what you paid for it used. Not what it is worth today, what it cost brand new on the day it was first registered. Because sitting underneath the standard rate is a second charge, one most owners have never even heard of, called the expensive car supplement. And for electric cars that cross that £50,000 line, it currently adds £440 a year on top of the £200 you are already paying, for 5 straight years, starting in year 2 and running all the way through to year 6. Add that up, and you are looking at £640 a year, every year, for half a decade, on a car the government spent the last 15 years telling you would practically tax itself for free. Here is where it gets worse, and I want you to sit with this one for a second, because it genuinely catches people out. This threshold used to be £40,000, not 50. And according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, the industry's own body, more than 70% of new electric car models on sale in Britain have a list price above £40,000. 70%. Electric cars are, on average, simply more expensive to build than their petrol equivalents because of the battery alone, which means the vast majority of new EVs sold in the last few years were never designed to dodge this charge. They were built directly into the price bracket that triggers it. The government did quietly raise the threshold to £50,000 from April this year, which pulls a slice of EVs back out of the supplement. But raise your hand if your electric SUV, your electric estate, or your electric family car with the bigger battery and the longer range, the one you specifically chose because range anxiety is a real thing on British roads, still sits above that new line. For a great many of you watching this, it does. Put a real car against these numbers for a second, Because abstract thresholds only mean something once you attach them to something you can picture on your own driveway. A mid-range electric family SUV, the kind sold in enormous numbers across Britain over the last 3 years, routinely left the factory with a list price somewhere between £45,000 and £55,000, once you added the bigger battery pack that most buyers chose specifically to avoid range anxiety. 2 identical cars, same badge, same shape, same year, one optioned just under £50,000 and one optioned just over it because the owner ticked a heat pump or a tow bar or a slightly larger wheel. One of those owners pays £200 a year from now on. The other pays £640. Same car, same road, same commute, and a £3,200 difference in tax alone over 5 years. Decided entirely by a handful of boxes ticked on a configurator 18 months before this rule even existed. Now think about who this actually lands on hardest, because it is not who you would assume. It is not the wealthiest EV buyers who feel this the most. Someone spending £80,000 or £90,000 on a performance electric car was never choosing that car because of the tax situation. The people this genuinely wounds are the ones who stretched, who bought a mid-range family EV 2 or 3 years ago specifically because they were told, by the government, by the dealer, by every headline at the time, that this was the financially responsible choice. Lower running costs, lower fuel costs, and no road tax, ever. That last part of the promise has now quietly been deleted, and nobody sent those owners a letter explaining it clearly. They found out from their renewal notice. Or they are about to. And here is the detail that makes this sting even more. This is not just a rule for new cars bought from this point forward. If you already own a zero-emission car that was first registered any time between April 2017 and the end of March 2025, you did not escape this. Your car has also moved on to the £200 standard rate as of this tax year. The exemption you bought your car under has simply been switched off, retroactively, for a vehicle you may have already owned for 2, 3, 4 years. You were not grandfathered in. You were not protected because you bought before the rule changed. The rule changed underneath you, on a car you already own, sitting on your driveway right now. So why would a government do this to the exact group of drivers it spent over a decade encouraging? Because I want to be fair here and give you the other side properly, since it is not a baseless decision. Treasury's own figures show this change is expected to raise a little over £500 million in the first year alone, rising toward almost £1 billion the year after, and climbing past £1.5 billion annually within a few years. Electric cars still use the roads, they still wear them down. They still need policing, still need infrastructure, and until this change, their owners were contributing nothing at all toward any of it, while petrol and diesel drivers carried the entire cost between them. From the Treasury's perspective, that was never sustainable long-term, and as electric cars stop being a rare, niche purchase and start becoming the default choice on British roads, taxing them like every other vehicle was, in their words, simply closing a gap that could not stay open forever. That is a genuinely defensible position. It does not change what it costs you, but it is worth understanding, because this was never framed by the people who wrote it as a punishment for choosing electric. It was framed as the exemption, finally catching up with reality. Whatever you think of the reasoning, the bill is still yours. So let's turn this into something you can actually use tonight, rather than something you just feel anxious about. First, find your car's original list price, the figure it was valued at when it was registered brand new, not the used price you paid, and not today's valuation. That single number decides whether you are inside or outside the expensive car supplement, and it is worth £528 a difference between £1 above the threshold and £1 below it once you add up all 5 years of the supplement. Second, check your exact registration date against the 1st of April 2025 and the 1st of April this year, because those 2 dates are the hinge points for almost every rule in this entire system, and a car registered a few weeks either side of them can be taxed completely differently from an identical car on the driveway next door. Third, if you are still shopping and haven't bought yet, that £50,000 line is now the single most important number on the spec sheet, more important than range, more important than charging speed, because a few optional extras ticked at the dealership can tip a £48,000 car over that line and lock you into £640 a year for 5 years, for features you might not even have wanted. Fourth, if you lease rather than own outright, do not assume your monthly payment already includes this.
A significant number of lease and finance providers only apply the new VED charge at the vehicle's registration anniversary, which means some drivers have not seen a single extra penny yet and are about to get a very unpleasant surprise on their next renewal notice, thinking nothing has changed when everything already has. Step back from the individual numbers for a second and look at the shape of the whole thing, because this is bigger than one tax line. For 15 years, the entire financial case for going electric in this country rested on 3 pillars. Cheaper to charge than to fuel. Cheaper to maintain, because there is no engine full of moving parts to wear out. And no road tax, ever. 2 of those 3 pillars are still standing. The third one, the one that made electric ownership feel almost free once you had paid for the car itself, has just been quietly taken away, quietly enough that a huge number of owners still do not know it has happened to them specifically. And here is the open question this leaves every single one of you sitting with tonight, because it does not have a clean answer yet. If the government is willing to remove a promise it made for over a decade the moment electric cars stop being the minority on the road, what happens to the next promise, the next incentive, the next exemption, once electric finally becomes the default rather than the exception? Nobody currently has a straight answer to that, including, I suspect, the people who wrote this policy. So tell me in the comments, did you know about this before today, or is this the first time you are hearing the actual number attached to your own car? Tell me the list price your car was registered at and I will tell you honestly whether you are one of the ones caught by the supplement, because a huge number of people asking that question in the comments below previous videos on this channel had no idea until someone worked it out for them. And if this genuinely changed how you are thinking about the car on your driveway, or the one you were about to order, send it to someone you know who bought electric specifically because they were told the tax was gone for good, because right now, for a great many of them, it very much is not. There is a second change quietly coming for a completely different group of British drivers, one that has had almost no coverage at all, and it might affect you even more than this one does. That is the next video.